The rain on Earth wasn't like the sky showers on Verx 9. Here, it came down slow and steady, not in rhythmic bursts, but in long, sorrowful weeping, like the sky itself was mourning. Sergeant Elijah Cross stood near the broken fence outside. The abandoned communications tower, its rusty shell groaning in the wind. He was a veteran, though he'd never call himself that. Too many memories clung to that word. He wore his jacket tight, boots muddy from patrol, though there hadn't been. A threatened nonce, at least, not one he could shoot at. Peace was supposed to have come after the Galactic Accord, after the long wars with the Krathians and the Riftborn, after humanity had bled enough stars red to earn a place at the big table. But tonight, something didn't sit right. The world around him whispered wrongness. Then he saw her. No, standing just inside the ruins of the tower, half in shadow, a small figure barely 4 feet tall, with glowing violet eyes like shattered amethyst and skin so pale it shimmered blue in the rain. She didn't move when he approached. Didn't flinch when he raised the pulse rifle, standard instinct. Just stared at him with an expression he hadn't seen in years. Desperate, innocent, and utterly alone. Elijah lowered the rifle. "You lost?" he asked gruffly, but his voice came out softer than expected. She nodded, then looked down at something cradled in her hands. A strange object, oval and humming faintly, like it had a pulse. "Help," she whispered. The word was shaky, unfamiliar, but human, not translated spoken. Elijah took a step closer, adrenaline sharpening his senses. "What are you?" he asked, then corrected himself. "Who are you?" She didn't answer, only lifted the humming object toward him. It flared briefly with light, and suddenly he felt something, not in his body, but in his chest, in his mind, a memory not his own. A crash, fire, her screaming. Then silence, and the voice of a child, alone in an alien tongue, repeating one word over and over in the dark. "Mother." He dropped to one knee, heart thudding. She wasn't threatening. She was pleading. Something in her expression struck him in a way armor never could. "Your mom," he said, voice barely audible above the rain. "Is she?" The girl, the alien girl, shook her head slowly, and her shoulders trembled. She wasn't just asking for help. She was begging for it, with the quiet dignity of someone who had lost everything but hadn't yet given up. Elijah hesitated, battle-trained instincts fighting against the part of him he thought had died on Andrus Prime, the part that once volunteered for medevac duty and cried when the orphans waved goodbye. Then came the twist. The girl pulled at her collar and revealed a tiny device implanted in her neck, something clearly forbidden under the new galactic treaties. Biological interface tech. Only 2 species used it anymore, and neither of them were allies. Elijah leaned closer, frowning. "You're not just lost," he murmured. "You're being hunted." Her silence was confirmation. Suddenly, the shadows around the tower didn't feel so empty. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. And yet she didn't move, didn't hide. Instead, she reached forward and touched his hand, just once. Not to manipulate, not to trap. It was comfort, gratitude, hope. Her skin was cold. Her fingers trembled. She looked up and said again, a little more clearly this time, "Human hope." Elijah looked back at the broken skyline behind him, at the world still healing from war, still skeptical of peace, still scared of others. Bringing her into his care could mean court-martial, worse, but something deeper inside. Him, a whisper, buried under years of military protocol and scars, told him that this moment was about more than orders. It was about being human. He stood, slowly holstering his rifle. "Okay, kid," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's find your mom." And behind them, in the wreckage of the tower, a faint red light blinked 3 times silent, unnoticed. A signal had been sent. Asterisk, asterisk, Elijah Cross wasn't a man who believed in fate. He'd seen too much randomness in war, too much luck and loss, intertwined to believe in anything but action and consequence. But as he guided the small alien child through the rain-slicked alleyways of the sleeping town of Hello Ridge, something gnawed at the back of his mind. She clung to his coat now, small fingers curled into the hem like it was the last thread tethering her to life. He still didn't know her name, if she had one he could understand, but her presence stirred an ache in him he hadn't felt since his sister's daughter died on Titan's 3rd colony station, long before the wars began. The few remaining. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting their dim halos through the fog as they walked. Every sound made him glance over his shoulder, the hiss of a gutter drain, the buzz of a power line. They weren't alone. He felt it. No soldier survives without learning that instinct. But for now, no one struck, and that silence gave him time to think. What the hell am I doing? He thought, jaw tight. taking in an alien child, possibly a fugitive, maybe even a weapon. He glanced down at her again. She was soaked to the bone, her thin garment clinging to her too slender frame, her strange eyes wide with more than just fear. She wasn't hiding behind him, she was watching him, studying, like she was trying to understand how far he'd go, how much he'd care. They reached his apartment on the second floor of a half-abandoned complex. The front door opened with a creak like an old man sighing. He hurried her inside, locking it behind them. The air inside was dry and warm, filled with the faint scent of solder and machine oil from his tools on the kitchen counter. A half-assembled radio lay there, forgotten. He tossed his jacket onto the couch and motioned to the bathroom. "Go," he said. "Get warm. Towels are inside." She hesitated at first and then walked in slowly, trailing faint puddles with her. He heard water running, heard her cough once, quietly. Then silence. He stared at the floor, then ran a hand through his wet hair. "What in God's name have you stepped into now, Cross?" The world was too fragile for mistakes. The treaties were brittle paper, signed by bloodied hands. Humans were still the newcomers, still the dangerous ones. Still the monsters, according to half the galaxy. He was supposed to report anything like this immediately. Instead, he'd broken about 4 lined statutes in under an hour, all because of a child who looked at him like he was the only thing between her and oblivion. When she came out, wearing one of his 2 large shirts and wrapped in a towel, she was shaking a little less. She stared at his old kettle as it whistled. He poured the tea without speaking, then pushed the cup toward her. She didn't drink right away, just sniffed it, curious. "It's not poison," he muttered, half smiling. She looked up, and then slowly, she smiled back. Just a little. Just enough to show it wasn't a mistake. He crouched down across from her. "You said help in English. You been around humans before?" She nodded. Then she took the oval device from her pocket, the one that had pulsed earlier, and tapped it against her palm. The air shimmered slightly, and a small projection appeared, blurry, damaged, but clearly a woman, tall and robed in strange armor. She was running, breathless. Her voice came through in fragments. "If anyone, if human, please, my daughter, she's innocent. They will come." "She doesn't know," static, and a scream. Then black. Elijah sat back slowly, his gut twisting. The child closed the projection. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, "Mom, gone." He didn't ask how. She knew. He just believed her. She didn't look like she could lie, not after showing him that. Not after showing trust. He took a deep breath, then leaned forward. "Okay, here's the deal. I'm going to keep you safe, all right? That means staying low. No lights, no windows. We'll figure this out." He paused, then added softly, "You got a name?" She looked puzzled. He pointed to his chest. "Elijah?" Then pointed to her. She stared at him a moment, then mimicked his gesture with uncertain fingers. "Teli," she said. Soft, like a name she wasn't used to saying out loud. But it fit. "Teli," he repeated and nodded. "All right, Teli, we'll get through this." She looked at him again, with eyes full of stars and sorrow, and for the first time, Elijah felt it settle. This wasn't about rules or duty anymore. This was something older, something human. He didn't know the full weight of it yet, but he could feel it building, like the low hum of storm clouds just before lightning strikes. And outside, in the shadows across the street, a figure watched. Cold, patient, not human. Elijah couldn't sleep that night. The wind rattled the windows like old ghosts knocking to be let in, and every so often a floorboard creaked, betraying the bones of the building. He sat at the edge of the couch, the glow of a forgotten screen. Dimming behind him, rifle leaning against the wall within arm's reach. Teli lay curled in a cocoon of blankets on the cot he had dragged out from storage. She hadn't asked for it. She didn't speak unless she had to. But the way she clutched that strange oval device in her sleep, like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality, made his heart ache in a way that had nothing to do with logic. She looked like every child he'd failed to save during the war, all wrapped into one small alien frame. She stirred sometime near dawn, eyes blinking open with a kind of ancient weariness that no child should carry. Elijah looked up from his cup of half-cold coffee. "Bad dreams?" he asked. Teli didn't answer, but her silence was loud enough. She sat up, the blanket sliding off her shoulders, revealing a network of faint scars along her collarbone thin and pale, like the echoes of something that had once been forced into her. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. It wasn't his pain to name. Instead, he got up, crossed to the kitchenette, and pulled out a small tin from the back of the cabinet. "You ever had peanut butter?" he asked, holding up a spoonful like an offering. She tilted her head. He handed it to her carefully, and she licked it with extreme caution. Her eyes lit up. For a moment, just a flicker of time, the war-torn weight lifted from her features, and she grinned with a child's pure, stunned delight. Elijah chuckled, though it caught in his throat. "Yeah," he said softly. "I used to trade rations for this stuff. You'd be amazed what a guy'll give up for a taste of home." Taylor nodded as if she understood, even if she didn't know. The words. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, no bigger than a coin metallic, etched with lines like circuitry. She pressed it against the oval device, and once again, a flickering image bloomed in the air. A memory. This time, not of fear, not of war. A garden under two suns. Her mother taller, younger, laughing as she lifted Taylor up onto her shoulders. Alien birds chirped in the trees. Her people, though different in every way, danced with the same joy Elijah remembered from Earth's summer festivals. It was beautiful, innocent. Gone dot the projection vanished. Taylor looked down. Elijah, moved by something he didn't fully understand, said quietly, "She loved you." Taylor nodded once. Then she touched her chest, and after a long pause, pointed at him. Her voice was unsure, the sentence clumsy, but the meaning clear. "You same?" His heart clenched. "Do you love me like she did?" That was the question. That was the terrifying, brave thing she dared to ask. He didn't answer right away. He could not, truthfully, not yet. But he did kneel beside her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I don't know what this is yet," he said honestly, "but I promise you, you're not alone anymore." Her small fingers reached up and touched his hand again. That same contact like before, but this time he felt something else. A sharing. A kind of transmission deeper than words. A flash of memory, not his own. Her, running barefoot through crystal sand, crying for someone to come back. A door closing. Her mother's voice, too calm, too final. "You must go. They will come for me, not you." Then the sound of her breath in a dark pod alone. The kind of memory a soul should not carry by itself. Elijah staggered back slightly. The image retreating like the tide. "How are you doing that?" He whispered, stunned. Taylor looked at the oval. "Bond," she said. "Memory share." She touched her chest again. Its gift. "My kind feel true." He stared at her, heart pounding. The simplicity of it overwhelmed him. Her species shared emotions raw, unfiltered. That's why she'd chosen him. She felt something in him, sorrow, maybe? Empathy. Something no scanner or translator could read, but she could dot suddenly. Everything made more sense. Why she hadn't run. Why she hadn't fought. She hadn't needed to. She knew him, not from logic. From feeling. He sank back into the chair, hands trembling. "Taylor," he said, voice low. "You're not just in danger, are you? You're important. You're something they want." She nodded slowly, and the smile she gave was no longer a child's smile. It was something ancient, tired, and knowing, as if she carried the weight of her entire race on her narrow shoulders. Outside, the wind picked up again. Somewhere, far off, a sharp, unnatural crack split the sky, not thunder. Not natural. The watchers had moved closer. Elijah looked at her then, really looked, and not as an alien or threat or a responsibility, but as someone who had been chosen, trusted, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel broken. He felt needed. He stood. "If they're coming for you, they're coming through me." Taylor reached out, not for protection this time, but in solidarity. She placed her palm against his. Two hands, two species, one silent vow, and somewhere. Out in the cold night, death began to circle. Asterisk, asterisk. The next morning didn't come with sunlight. Just gray. A sky clogged with low, heavy clouds that threatened storms, but delivered only stillness, the kind that choked the lungs and made everything feel too quiet. Elijah stood on the balcony with binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning rooftops and alleyways. Taylor sat behind the closed curtains inside, cross-legged on the floor, her hands resting on her knees, eyes closed. She didn't speak much now. She barely moved. As if she was listening to something far away. As if a tide was rising in her thoughts. He'd called in an old favor the night before, sending a scrambled message through a back door. Com system to someone who owed him their life from Anders Prime. Captain Rhea Dalton, now buried deep in the diplomatic intelligence corps, had responded with only 5 words. "Get out. She's not safe. No names. No details. Just that. He didn't need more." The message meant only one thing: the girl was more than an orphan. Stepped back inside and locked the balcony door, watching Taylor as she sat motionless. "We have to move," he said. "There's a transport terminal outside the ridge." We'll hitch a ride to Old Denver, then figure out next steps from there. She opened her eyes slowly, and Elijah froze. Her pupils had changed, dilated, faintly glowing like molten silver. "You're changing," he murmured. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer, just said one word: "Soon." It wasn't until they reached the outskirts of the city walking, back roads, avoiding drones, hiding under overpasses when military flyers buzzed low, that she finally told him. They sat behind an old solar farm, the panels long dead, rust devouring their frames. Wind blew dust in lazy spirals. She sat beside him, hugging her knees, her head low. "They lied," she said, the words barely more than a whisper. "They said, we die out, no more gifts, no more children." Her voice quivered, but she forced herself onward. "But I'm not like them. I kept it." Elijah leaned closer. "Kept what?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with that same swirling light. "The core, the inheritance. My kind, we pass memory, life, soul through bond, one to next, mother to daughter. But they tried to end us. Machines, fire, silence." She placed a hand over her chest. "I am last." He felt the words like a knife, sliding between ribs. "You're the last of your kind?" She nodded once, slowly. "And the only one left who remembers?" "I am my mother, and her mother, and her mother, all inside, all still alive inside me, waiting." Elijah's breath caught. The oval device, the memory transmission, the bond. It wasn't just technology, it was legacy. Biological, emotional, spiritual. She wasn't just a child. She was an arc. "That's why they're hunting you," he whispered. "You're the key to your species. If they kill you, we vanish. Forever." He rubbed a hand on his face, mind spinning. He thought of all the times humanity had come close to that kind of extinction, before space travel, before unification. During the bitter first contact wars, whole cultures burned for someone else's idea of order. He remembered how the universe called humans primitive, violent, unpredictable. Maybe they were, but they also remembered, they protected. And now, staring at this trembling girl who carried generations inside her, he knew there wasn't a government, a treaty, or a threat strong enough to make him abandon her, but fate had already arrived. A low hum filled the air. Not wind, not natural, the kind of sound that came before death. Taylor bolted upright. They found us. Elijah grabbed his rifle and scanned the horizon. 3 dark figures approached, hovering low. Over the dirt, tall, angular. Drones? No, something worse. Not machines, but wearers of machines. Armored in obsidian suits, faces hidden behind mirrored helmets, Krathian reclaimers. He'd seen them only once, on a battlefield stained with the blood of both sides. They weren't soldiers. They were eradicators. Quiet, clinical, merciless. And now they were here. He aimed, but didn't fire. They stopped 50 meters out, forming a triangle. One of them stepped forward. Its voice came not from the helmet, but through the air-translated synthetic hollow. "Surrender the memory vessel." Tali gripped his arm. "They don't want to kill. Not now. They want to extract, empty me." Her voice was cold now. Resigned. Elijah raised his rifle. "You're not taking her." The reclaimer tilted its head. "Human, your species is young, curious, compassionate, but compassion breeds infection. This creature carries knowledge that will undo the balance. It is a virus of the past. Let it die." "Funny," Elijah said. "I've heard that exact line before. Always from those too afraid to feel anything." The wind shifted. Taylor's grip tightened. They're calling more. He knew then they wouldn't survive a fight. Not now. Not here. But maybe they didn't need to. Maybe there was still time for something greater. A different kind of defiance. Taylor stepped forward. Elijah tried to stop her, but she turned to him with calm eyes. "I remember something my mother said," she whispered. "When hope is small, you put it in the hands that feel most." Then she pressed the memory core, the oval, into his hands. He staggered at the weight, not physical, but emotional. 1,000,000 lives, 1,000 years, all of it inside him now. "No," he gasped. "I can't, you must," she said, smiling softly. "You feel more than any I've ever known. You are worthy." Then she turned to the reclaimers, lifted her arms, and whispered a single phrase in her native tongue. A pulse of light erupted from her skin dot, and the world split open. Asterisk, asterisk, the pulse wasn't an explosion, it was deeper than that. It wasn't meant to destroy, it was meant to speak, to call. The shockwaves shimmered like liquid glass, rolling out over the dry earth, through the air, into the bones of the world. Elijah staggered back as it passed through him, and in that instant he saw them, all of them. Flickers of faces, 100 lives behind Taylai's eyes. A child on a cliff watching twin moons rise. A warrior falling with a blade of light in her hand. A mother holding her daughter in the last hour of a day. Burning sky, so many memories. So much pain, so much love. All inside her. All now shared with him. And then the light collapsed, folding inward. And Taylai fell to her knees. The reclaimers didn't move. For one breathless second, the desert was silent. Then one of them spoke, voice static rough. Transmission confirmed. She has initiated the vault. Target compromised. Eliminate. Elijah didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The blast hit the lead reclaimer square in the chest, but it only staggered him. Not dead. Not even close. Their armor was denser than the last time he'd faced them. Upgraded. Built for resilience. For war. He fired again and again, forcing them back just enough to snatch Taylai from the dirt and run. Her body was light too light. Her eyes half-lidded, breathing shallow. She had poured herself into that signal, and now she was fading. You idiot. Elijah muttered through clenched teeth, holding her close as he sprinted for the tree line beyond the solar field. You were supposed to hide, not light a beacon. But he already knew why she had done it. That signal wasn't a distress call. It was a message, a last will. She had passed the core into him, transferred everything. And the pulse had been her final act, broadcasting the truth to anyone still listening in the deep, black quiet of space. It wasn't just about saving herself anymore. It was about giving her people one last voice before she disappeared. And now they were hunting him. He reached a slope of broken stone and ducked behind it, laying her gently on the ground. She opened her eyes, barely, and whispered, I feel them. They want the core. They will cut you open to find it. He brushed the hair from her face, his hands trembling. They won't touch me. I'll draw them away. You just stay alive. You have to stay alive. She reached for his arm. Don't let them unmake us. Those words hit like a thunderclap. Not me, she had said. Astat, and he understood. The reclaimers didn't just want the knowledge. They wanted to erase the memory. All of it. Her people had preserved their legacy not in monuments or databases, but in emotion and shared sorrow and love. Something the reclaimers and everything they served couldn't control. Couldn't predict. That was why they feared her. Why they feared him now. Because empathy was unpredictable. Because grief remembered. And because hope had found a human heart, he pressed his forehead gently to hers. I won't let them take. Not 1 second of it. Then he stood and ran down the slope, across the cracked road, through the skeletal trees, firing wildly, making sure they saw him. The reclaimers followed, cold and relentless. They didn't scream. They didn't curse. They just pursued, silent as judgment. One shot clipped his side. Pain flared bright behind his ribs, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not now. He led them toward the old rail line half collapsed. Long abandoned, a rusting memory of Earth's early terraforming days. He ducked into the tunnels beneath it, narrow and dark, filled with damp rot and shattered glass. Perfect. He kept running until the air turned stale, and the sound of their boots echoed behind him like drums. And then he turned, stood tall in the dark, wounded, breathing hard, and waited. When the reclaimers came into view, they slowed, one step forward. Where's the vessel? Elijah raised his rifle, blood dripping from his arm. Gone. You're too late. The reclaimer raised, an arm weapon charged. I'm human, Elijah growled. You think we don't know how to die for something bigger than ourselves? They hesitated, and that was enough. He pulled the detonator from his belt, not a bomb. A jerry-rigged M8 charge one he built years ago and never dared use. Enough to fry their suits. Enough to give Taylai time to escape. Maybe not enough to survive, but enough. Let me show you what real memory looks like, he whispered, and triggered the charge. The tunnel lit up like sunrise. Sound vanished. Pain vanished. And the world fell into light. Asterisk, asterisk, the light was blinding, white and fierce like a second birth, and then it collapsed inward, folding the tunnel into thick, suffocating silence. Elijah lay motionless at first, chest tight, head spinning. The charge had gone off perfectly. It hadn't been built to kill. It had been built to strip, to rip the power right out of anything mechanical within 100 feet. That included reclaimer suits. That included the little transmitter they'd hidden in his shoulder from the war, which now sparked faintly. Dead. For a moment, everything was still. Even his thoughts. Then breath returned. He coughed once, rolled onto his side, and groaned. Pain spiked like lightning along his ribs. Blood soaked through his shirt. He tasted copper, saw it dripping from his lip. But he was alive. And so were they. The reclaimers lay scattered like broken statues, twitching, convulsing in the dying pulse of their own systems. One of them, its helmet cracked and steaming, began to rise, joints clicking, slow and jagged, like a beast dragging itself up from the bottom of a nightmare. Its voice stuttered from the suit's failing speakers. "You cannot carry the vault. You are unworthy." Elijah rose shakily to his feet, cradling the memory core still strapped tight to his chest. "You think I don't know that?" he said, through clenched teeth. "You think I haven't spent years carrying ghosts I never asked for?" He stumbled forward, heart pounding, every step dragging agony up through his bones. "I was a medic in Anders' prime," he rasped. "I held children while they died screaming. I dragged friends out of wreckage. I watched commanders burn entire forests because they thought it might win a battle." His voice shook now, not with weakness, but rage, old, buried, finally rising. "And after all of it, the only thing I could never forget was the faces. The looks they gave me, like I mattered. Like I could save them." He stepped over one of the reclaimers, kicked its weapon away. It sparked feebly. "Useless. You want to know what humanity's real weapon is?" he asked. "It's not our guns. It's not our ships. It's that we remember, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." The last reclaimer lunged at him, fast despite the damage. Elijah caught it by the arm, bracing himself with a cry of pain, and slammed it back against the tunnel wall. "You erased your past," he growled. "We carry ours into the fire." With a final roar, he jammed the cord directly against the reclaimer's chest. The effect was instant. The alien's body went rigid as the core, ignited, not with fire but with memory. It wasn't an explosion, it was a flood. A psychic torrent of thousands of lives pressed into its system. It convulsed, shrieking, armor cracking as Tylai's inheritance, the grief. The songs, the warmth, the screams, all surged through something that had long since forgotten how to feel. And then it shattered. The reclaimer's suit crumpled too. The floor, empty. Elijah dropped the core, panting, hands trembling. His knees buckled, and he slumped against the wall. It was done. Not all of them. Not the entire system that had hunted her kind across stars. But these few, this hunt. This endless chase was finally over, and that's when he heard footsteps dot light. There, Tylai stepped into the broken tunnel, limping but upright. She had followed his trail. Somehow she had found him. She dropped to her knees beside him, her small hands fluttering over his wounds. He tried to smile, but it hurt too much. "Told you? You were supposed to run," he whispered. She shook her head, eyes glassy, skin glowing faintly with that same soft shimmer from before. "Not leave you, never." He reached up, touching her cheek gently. You saw it, didn't you? Through the core." Tylai nodded, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "You gave them peace, even the machines. They felt it." "We felt it." And for a moment, the two of them sat there in the rubble and fading static, surrounded by the shattered remains of weapons and hate, holding hands like survivors of a storm older than language. Then she placed the core back into his hands. "I thought it was me," she whispered. "But it was always you." Elijah blinked. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, her voice quiet, almost reverent. "The memory doesn't choose by blood, it chooses by heart." He laughed, hoarse. "Well, that's a terrible mistake." But she only smiled. The air above them shimmered again, another projection forming, this time from her body, her mother's voice. Calm, warm. "To whoever carries this, know that memory is not survival. It is responsibility. We do not ask you to save us. Only to remember we were here." The image faded, and Elijah understood. He hadn't just protected her. He had become the living vault of an entire lost world, and it would change him forever. Asterisk, asterisk. The desert turned golden with dawn. Not the dusty gray light of uncertain weather, but real light, sharp, honest, the kind that makes shadows run and reveals every scar with reverence. Elijah sat on a flat rock, half his shirt torn away and wrapped around the wound in his side. The bleeding had slowed. His breath came easier now. The memory core pulsed softly against his chest, no longer frantic, no longer hot with urgency. It was quiet now, settled, not because the danger had passed, but because it had finally been. Understood. He ran his thumb along its curved edge, feeling the weight of it not in his arms, but in the back of his mind, where hundreds of lives whispered softly like wind through old trees. Tylai sat beside him, feet dangling over the rock's edge. She'd found the coat in one of the scavenged supply boxes. Too big for her. Her eyes were no longer glowing, but they still held that impossible depth, as if staring into her meant falling through 1,000 stories all at once. She didn't speak. Neither did he, not for a long while. They just watched the sunrise over the ruins of the world they barely saved. Finally, she broke the silence. Where do we go now? Elijah took a long breath, slow and steady. Somewhere quiet, somewhere forgotten. Places people don't go anymore. Places that need stories. She nodded. She understood. That was the thing about Taylor she didn't ask for more than she needed. Just clarity. Just truth. He looked down at the core. They're still with me, he said. All of them. All the songs. All the pain. Your mother's voice. Your people's last memories. His hand tightened slightly. They're a part of me now. I can't take it out, even if I wanted to. You don't want to, she said, and it wasn't a question. He smiled faintly. No, I don't. She looked out over the horizon again, and after a moment, reached into her sleeve and pulled something out, a shard of crystal. Thin, iridescent, like frozen light. She held it out to him. This is what we used to keep our stories in before the vault. Songs, names, laughter, even our sky. He took it carefully, holding it up to the light. The crystal caught the sun and fractured it into 1,000 colors. Beautiful. That's why they destroyed them, she said softly. Because beauty makes people feel, and feeling makes people resist. He nodded. That too, he understood. Empires didn't fear armies. They feared grief. They feared memory passed from one generation to the next, wordless and potent. They feared people who remembered what was lost and why it mattered. We'll make more of these, he said. We'll hide them, teach others how to read them. Maybe one day your people won't just be remembered, they'll be known. Taylor leaned her head against his arm. You're my family now, she whispered. Not because you saved me, but because you stayed. His throat tightened. He had heard that sentence once before, from a dying soldier in the final siege of Delta Nova. Don't leave yet. Just stay a little longer. Back then, he hadn't stayed. He hadn't had time. Or maybe he hadn't had the heart. But this time, he had Dot, and that made all the difference. The sky was clear now. The sensors in his belt chirped faintly long-range atmospheric scans. Somewhere, beyond the ridge, a small Alliance vessel was pinging the airwaves. A merchant, probably. Maybe a mining crew. Harmless. They could catch a ride. Disappear into the drifting corners of space. Keep moving. Keep remembering. I'm not a soldier anymore, Elijah said aloud. No, Tele agreed. You're a carrier, a keeper, a human vault. He nodded slowly. I like that. They rose together. Two figures against the endless land. One man, one girl. One vessel of humanity, the other of starlight and grief, and a past that refused to vanish. Together they walked toward the distant hills, the crystal safe in Elijah's pocket, the memory. Core warm against his skin, and somewhere deep in the universe beyond known sectors, past bureaucracies and wars and silence, a signal had begun to echo. Story had survived. It had taken root in the last place anyone expected, a human heart.